Hello and welcome to today's episode of IBBA Insights. I'm your host, Chris Diglio, and I'm happy to be here to bring you another story and a podcast along the lines of working with a business broker to sell your business. Today's episode is going to be unique because we're going to have both the buyer and the seller from the same transaction talk to us about their point of view of working with a business broker from the buyer's perspective and from the seller's perspective on the same transaction. So if you're out there and you're thinking about selling your business, if you're thinking about, do I hire a business broker? This is a great episode to watch and to listen to because you're going to hear from the mouth of someone that hired a business broker that took them from the beginning stages through due diligence to a closing on what it was like working with the business broker, what value the broker brought to the table, and if they had to do it all over again, would they still hire the business broker? And if you're thinking about buying a business, you're going to hear from a buyer who's bought businesses before, but yet makes a statement, if I ever sold a business, I would use a business broker. Now, that's a really strong statement for someone that has been through the process and is an expert at buying business. If they were to sell a business, they would hire a business broker. So today, again, we're going to explore the value of using a broker when selling your business. So now I'd like to welcome Micah Hamilton and Matthew Saskin to IBBA Insights. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good. Well, Micah, you're the founder of OilFi, a mobile oil change company, and you were going to market and looking to sell. And Matthew, you started off in real estate holdings, investment in real estate, I believe, and then transitioned to investing in businesses where you own right now East Coast Towing, and you bought OilFi from Micah. So what makes today's episode unique is we get an opportunity not just to continue our conversation about the process and working with a broker on the sale of a transaction. We get to talk about a very specific transaction and hear from the side of the buyer and the side of the seller. So, and this is what really intrigues me because you both are going to have your different feeling of how it went down and when and what the process was like. So I really, really look forward to hearing from both of you today. But Micah, I'll start with you, if you don't mind. How did you get started with OilFi? I mean, you're the founder, but tell us a little bit about what gave you the thought or the vision to start that company.
Yeah, so I was working in sales for a solar panel company for about 6 years. It's a small business. When I started there, it was the owner working out of his house and garage, and he had one installer that worked with him and another part-time installer. So a very small business. And I had been in full commission sales for about 10 years at that point, and or 7 or 8 years at that point, and with some solar experience, but I wanted to switch companies from a larger company to possibly a different company. So I met with him and talked to him about, hey, can I come over and, do sales for you? Because he was doing everything, sales, install. He was a unlimited electrician. And we worked out a deal. I came on and started helping him and worked with him for about 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. And, through sales, but also I would, sell the jobs and handle all that. And he would, make sure the installs went well. But at the end of 2019, at that time, we had moved out of his garage, and we had, I think it was 7 or 8 installers, 3 or 4 office staff at that time, and I'd really just seen that company grow, through his leadership, but also bringing sales into the equation that he, really didn't have a lot of experience in, and then he, it kind of motivated me to. Then, man, maybe I should start my own business sometime. I know I have the ability to go out and through customer service and customer acquisition, um, you know, sell some sort of service or product. And, so I wanted to do, start my own business. And then I saw him sell his business, and it just made me more interested in, man, maybe I should do something like this. So in 2020, end of 2019, I really had the idea of and getting our oil changes done is a pain on our fleet trucks that we had, and also obviously personal vehicles. Everybody has a vehicle. There's nothing more annoying and frustrating than when you see the oil change due light coming on or the overdue sticker, and it's like, man, I don't like doing this. Why don't I start a business? Nobody else enjoys it. Let's make it convenient and bring oil changes to people. So, um, end of 2019, we did a lot of planning. My brother came back from overseas um, and was looking for a job here in the States. And so I offered him a job to help me start this business month, something like that. I
Hold
would
on
do
one
3 days
second.
solar panel sales and 2 days
Hey,
oil plant.
Micah.
Yes.
Matthew, on your end, did he freeze or was it just on my
He
end?
did.
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah, it froze
So
up.
if you could start off with back with my brother came back from overseas
Okay.
and then go from there.
Okay. So yeah, my brother came back from service overseas, and I was looking for a job, and I wanted to start a business, and so we did a lot of planning and started doing mobile oil changes with the thought of doing residential services. Um, Pretty quickly found that there was a large need for fleet servicing. We got a few fleet customers and found that there was just as much need for commercial fleets needing, after hours on-site service. And so we started to really just focus on fleet vehicles. Um, After doing that for just a few months, we said, man, we noticed that their tires are always bald on these vehicles. And so we said, hey, why don't we set up a mobile tire rig and oil change rig so we can sell them tires and also oil changes and filters and things like that. And so then we added tires into the equation. And I think that was a real turning point for us to then be able to, add more fleets and, sell more tires and, really just grow from there. And so from when I started the business, my plan was about 4 to 5, 6 years, eventually look at some sort of a sale if I wanted to, and that's what we ended.
So before we get started on the actual sale of the business and talking about that, we're recording this podcast on inauguration day in 2025, and so what a great American success story to hear that it's still possible here in the United States to have a dream, start your business, and be successful, and then build it, grow it, and sell it. But before we talk about the sale, Micah, Matthew, I want to shift back over to you. You were, believe, very involved in invested in real estate, and at some point decided to transition over to owning a business, not just buying a business, then buying business, but still remaining on as an employee of a company or keeping your job while owning another business. Talk to me a little bit, very briefly, about that
Yeah.
transition, and then after that, we'll certainly get into this transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, essentially, I've spent kind of the bulk of my career in the technology industry in primarily sales leadership, and executive roles. On the side of that, my wife and I had been investing in real estate for uh, a long time, like let's call it 15 years or so. And then kind of a few things happened simultaneously, but to kind of make it short, over COVID, we sold the bulk of the real estate portfolio. Knock on wood, I'd rather be lucky, and we sort of top ticked the market there. And then became this discussion of kind of what do we do next? Where do we invest money? What do we want the next 10, 20 years to look like? And I had, been fortunate enough that in kind of corporate world, I'd spent a bunch of time in various roles on M&A, on buying businesses, admittedly larger, right? We're talking 10 to $50 million EBITDA businesses. But sort of had that experience, have had the fortune of kind of working for some private equity and venture capital backed companies, and stumbled across sort of and sort of knew it was a thing, but sort of stumbled across the marketplace of smaller businesses available for sale. So that sort of piqued the interest. Started looking and kind of got real serious in mid 22 or so. Ended up finding the first company we acquired, East Coast Towing here in Raleigh. And there's tons more to go into there, but I'll keep it brief. Yeah, so since then, we've had this business for about 2.5 years, have made a couple of additional incremental acquisitions, including OilFi. And now, we're focused on both integrating those acquisitions and just continuing to operate and grow the business. I've got an awesome team here as part of it.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing that. And we're going to jump now into really the reason why we're here today. A large part of our listening audience are business owners and business buyers, but Micah, they're in your shoes, the shoes you were in when you were thinking about possibly selling the business, and lots of thoughts that go through their head. I could sell it on my own, put it out there on platforms. Could I do it? Maybe I'll save a commission, or is it worthwhile, hiring an advisor or a broker to assist me with the sale of the business? And if so, what's the process involved? So why don't you talk to us a little bit, Mike, about what went through your head and what went through your decision-making process while you were interviewing brokers to sell your business?
Yeah, so I would say it started in about a year before I actually put the business on the market. Had thoughts, like I said, it was kind of always in the plan eventually to sell if I wanted to. And so when I decided, hey, I do want to actually try to sell this business, but I have never sold a business and likewise never started a business other than this one. And so like I was very green as far as the process goes, and frankly still am a little bit. But back in I think it was June or so of 2023, I said, well, let me go talk to some brokers and just see if I do have a business that is sellable, right? And so I talked to, I don't know, 4 or 5 different brokers and landed on one. And that, at that time that, hey, when I am ready to sell, I will likely use this gentleman. And so, I think, if I'm giving somebody advice on selling their business, I would say, you got to make sure that you have a sellable business and talk to brokers, and they'll tell you because they don't want to waste their time trying to sell a business that isn't sellable. And so, that's kind of what the very first step of me, deciding to sell it and then, finding a broker. And then come a year later, it was, time to make that happen. So, yeah, I think I answered the question, but.
No, you did. And what made you decide at that point when you went forward to say, you know what, I am going to hire the services or utilize the services of a business broker rather than trying to sell it by myself or on your own? What made you decide that was the right route to go?
Yeah, brokers are not cheap, and so like if you've looked at all, like it is costly. The reason and I try to be very thrifty and try not to give all my money away, and it's not easy, definitely hiring a broker, but for me, I was an owner operator and running my business, and I did not feel, one is I didn't have the experience to sell it on my own. And also I didn't have the time to put into, learning how to sell a business and then hoping that I could sell it and dealing with, all the things that brokers deal with, screening customers and whatnot, and so that's why I ultimately wanted to hire a broker, is mainly because of experience and also time, to deal with it. And, in the end, we sold the business. I think it was a good, it's expensive, but I feel like it was a good option for me.
So the first time going through it, selling a business that you built on your own, deciding, all right, I'm going to work with a broker to assist me in the sale of the business. You said you interviewed several. What were the deciding factors in choosing the broker you chose, and why? What was important to you in the process? What did a broker bring to the table that was important to you if you were going to hand over your business for them to be able to sell?
Couple things, I guess. For what's always important to me when I'm dealing with a broker, a realtor, an insurance person, is communication. And so for me, like, I have to have somebody that I know will pick up the phone. Like, I don't have a lot of time. I'm running a business. So when I want to deal with something, I really want to talk to that person or send an email and expect a fairly quick reply. And, I've reached out to several brokers, and if it took them 2 days, 3 days to get back with me, like, I'm sorry, I'm probably not going to choose you because, it's, I don't have time to deal with that. And so I would say my broker was very responsive, and quick to get back with me. One of the brokers that I did speak with and talk with, he was responsive as well, but he told me that my business wasn't sellable. And so, he was wrong there, and clearly, and he, lost it because of that, I guess. Other than that, I think just finding somebody that was likable, that, that I could, somebody that I could hang out with, and speak with, and get along with, was important to me as well. But, most importantly, like I said, somebody that was going to be responsive, somebody that had experience, was also, important to me.
Michael, we're going to get into the process about what happened later on, but let's fast forward a little bit now. So you interviewed brokers, you hired a broker. They went through the marketing aspect of it. They started marketing for buyers for you, and that's where you, Matthew, come in. So Matthew, you got word of this opportunity, and from your point of view, now you're a buyer out there that sees this opportunity. You and hundreds of other people that are looking at this. Talk to me about the process in buying the business, from having to make that phone call and working with the broker and not having immediate direct access to the seller of the business, but having someone that's kind of in between both of you.
Sure, yeah, and I think it's probably worth noting, right? So we've completed a handful of transactions, all with intermediaries involved, all with brokers. There's a handful of quote unquote off market, right, non-brokered opportunities that we're working through, just because we know the seller because they're in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, I'm kind of always keeping an eye out with both brokers I've spoken to in the past, as well as on, right, Biz Buy Sell and Axial and a few other sites, as to kind of what's out there, right? And in particular for us, that's kind of what's in our area, let's call it North Carolina, and what is either within our industry, which is towing and recovery, or slight adjacencies, right? Micah's business fit in really nicely with us for a whole bunch of reasons. So, I think it was maybe a Tuesday. I don't recall if I got word of this from an email from the broker, just being on that broker's list, or if I saw it on Biz Buy Sell. But in any event, saw the sort of initial marketing material and went, okay, this actually makes a ton of sense. I could immediately see, and talk with my GM. We can immediately see kind of where it fit into us. From the real high level view of the world we saw, which was basically kind of revenue, SDE, and a price. My thought was, that all seems fair enough. Like, there's some, we could talk through details there, but that all seems fair enough. So, reached out to the broker, signed the NDA, had a quick phone call, just to let him know, hey, right, we're in this industry. This is our current business. And from my point of view, my next step would always be, like, basically, I want to meet the seller. Right. I think at the end of the day, you can diligence whatever you'd like, but a business is a transaction between two people, and it could be the best business in the world, but if I don't think I can sit down and shake hands and trust the person who's selling the business, it makes it a lot harder thing to pursue. And I told the broker that as much. Just kind of my goal would be, I want to sit down and meet with the seller, and then if that all works out, like, we're prepared to put together an LOI and move pretty quick. So if I recall, maybe on Friday of that week, we ended up meeting for about an hour. We sent over an LOI that evening. And I think, Micah, you signed it the next kind of Monday or Tuesday with a couple of quick back and forths, and that was that.
Matthew, that's the beginning of the process. So you get on the phone, or you send an email, then you get on the phone, you wind up talking to the broker, hearing more about the opportunity, setting up the meeting, putting forth your LOI that was accepted. There are horror stories out there. So I'm not going to sit here and do this podcast and tell business owners that you have to sell your business with a broker because all business brokers are great. Well, that's just not true. All business brokers are not great. Some do stand in the way of getting deals done, or don't. The flow of information isn't maybe as quickly as it should be, and for whatever reason they're out to prove a point. But then you have, on the flip side, the facilitators, the other brokers, the trusted advisors, those that understand what their role is in the transaction, that they are helping their client, if it's the sellers, to sell their business and introduce it to people like yourself, Matthew. But they also understand that there's a process that you might go through as a buyer, but there's a process that they go through in representing the seller and making sure that all aligns. So initially when you first made that contact, how was your experience in this particular transaction in dealing with the broker?
Yeah, I would say from my point of view, the broker involved here was fantastic. Like I would say kind of top, let's call it top 20% of the brokers that I've dealt with. Had a had a very well structured process. If anything, I would say maybe a bit too structured given the size of the transaction, but that's fine. I can understand that. But had a very clear view of what was going on and what needed to be done. I think from my vantage point was flexible enough when it came time to just doing that initial back and forth between us as a buyer and the broker trying to establish the broker rightfully so. I wanted to make sure that kind of we're credible and that if we were to proceed here, that there's a likelihood we could actually get a transaction complete. So I think he was flexible enough in, hey, they'd normally want to see A, B, and C, but having an existing business of kind of reasonable scale in the market, we were able to show kind of, hey, we're serious about doing this, and here's why. But yeah, overall, extraordinarily good to deal with, and we'll obviously, I think we'll talk more about the process and yeah, it was a great experience from my end, and I would say we've experienced the spectrum of brokers, both in terms of deals we've pursued as well as transactions we've closed.
So working with a good intermediary or broker can make the process, you know, a lot easier to go through. It's never an easy process, right? Anyone that says that buying or selling a business is easy, they've probably never done it, or they had that once in a lifetime experience where
Right.
everything just went so smooth. But they could also make it a very miserable experience. And you might have that perfect fit, but they never get together because of the hindrance that was involved. Michael, we now have your broker out there. He's talked to you, or they've talked to you about the process. They're going to take your business to market. They're going to start dealing with buyers. They're going to pre-screen, pre-qualify, kind of get the understanding, then let you know about these buyers and possibly hold the meetings. And again, the value of the broker involved hopefully is, not to give too much too soon, or hold back too much and be too stringent. So now you get that call. You say, "Hey, I've got this person, this Matthew guy that owns a company, East Coast Towing, is interested in your business." Talk to me about the conversation your broker's having with you and this part of the process leading up to ultimately the LOI and you feeling comfortable enough to sign off on that.
Yeah. I mean, we're going back pretty far now. I'm trying to remember the exact conversations, but I do remember, talking to him about after that buyer seller meeting was set up, and that they told me that he was he had, I guess, set some sort of financials, and they were confident that if the meeting went well, and everything, that there could be an offer on the table. And that's, I don't remember a whole lot of the details around the conversation leading up to that point, but yeah, I mean, overall everything was pretty smooth up until that point. So
How many of these conversations did you have with buyers? Was Matthew the first person and only person you spoke to, or did you wind up having several discussions?
now I can tell him now, yeah, he was the first. And um, part of Matthew's LOI, he wouldn't. We didn't pursue a bunch of other people after that signed LOI. So went on the market, was on the market for a few weeks. We did have a lot of interest from people, and my broker did a good job, I think, of screening out people that didn't that wouldn't have been a good fit for various reasons. But yeah, Matthew was the first buyer seller meeting that we had, and then, like I said, he moved quick on the LOI, and everything seemed to be really good fit on both sides for us. And so there was a lot of interest after that, but we didn't. My brokers didn't, try to set up a bunch of meetings after we already had a signed LOI. It didn't seem like it would make sense unless the deal fell through. And so I do think that if it was if the business was on the market for longer time before the offer, for before the offer, we would have had other meetings and whatnot. But
There's a very valuable lesson to be learned from this story. you have a lot of people that are selling their business and they list it and they get a very serious buyer inquiry right from the start. And the attitude sometimes from the seller is, well, that's just the first offer. I don't, let's just see what's out there. And as the broker, you don't want to sit there and push someone into a direction, but when there's a good offer and if it's a solid offer and if it's a solid group. And sometimes a seller will make the mistake of just walking away or being so difficult to deal with the first person or two that they speak with, that they ultimately ruin the possibility of a great marriage, a great fit, and the sale of the business, and wind up holding it 6, 9, 12 months later and it sells, or it never sells to begin with. So, Matthew, when you're in the position of being the buyer, knowing that it's new to the market, that could be a difficult thing to run up against when you're one of the first, if not the first person putting forth an offer. In your mind, how do you deal with that? Because you buy businesses now, so how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things come to mind. So the first one is, I'm sort of first thinking, who else might be buying this business? And when I look at OilFi as an example, right, two buyer types, if you will, came to mind. One would be somebody like us, right? So someone who's kind of in the same or an adjacent industry and can kind of very easily take that business and integrate it, right? So taking 7 people, and we're just shy of 60 people today, and that's inclusive of OilFi. So we were 50 beforehand. And then the other end, just based on sort of the size of OilFi, would be someone who was buying it to truly step in and step into a job, right? And that's sort of my view. So it's okay, who's the potential buyers going to be? And then the second is kind of, does that business make sense for us, and what's the right price? In this case, Micah and the broker had priced the deal. I thought it was priced very fairly. I think Mike and I have actually had a very open conversation about this maybe a month ago. So after we closed, just about kind of pricing and where it could have or should have been. But they had priced it at something I thought was a kind of the right price, not too expensive, not a screaming deal, let's say. Or I think Micah got a fair amount of money. And so for us, it was simply, okay, I know this business is a fit at face value. If something crazy happens during diligence, we can talk through it. And I think that's probably why the broker kind of came to you, Micah, with we've got a serious buyer, because I told them directly, listen, this business makes a lot of sense to us. Here's the kind of baseline data we'd be looking at, and then I'd love to meet the seller. And if all goes well, we'll submit an LOI that day. I'm just kind of very direct and upfront about it. And if that works and gets us through a deal or moving into diligence quickly, fantastic. And if it doesn't, and if a seller wants to drag their heels a little bit, or the price just isn't right, I'm okay just kind of moving on and focusing on the next thing. And another deal we closed, I spent 2 years from the first time I met the seller till we actually got a deal done, and there were a lot of reasons for that, including a not so great broker involved, but I'm not in the interest. I don't need to drag things along. I don't need to, potentially overpay for a deal. They're worth a thing to me. And if we can make it work and it's beneficial to everybody, phenomenal. Let's do it. And if not, then not.
Yeah,
I could tell, Matthew.
I was going to say,
Oh, go ahead, Micah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like, I have a good accountant that is a friend of mine and, has done a good job keeping our business, to my knowledge, up until the sale. They're very structured. So
Yep.
I felt like if I had a good buyer that I liked, and again, meeting the buyer was also very important, because I wanted to have somebody likewise that I could work with and honestly be friends with and help, work with through the process there. If I didn't like the buyer, I wasn't going to sell my business to somebody I didn't like. And
Sure.
so, I think that when my broker sent over, who the meeting was with, I Googled Matthew's name and watched a podcast that he was on. And, after that, I felt very confident that, if everything lined up, that it would be a good fit. But I was also very confident that, if we could make the deal work, from that LOI moving forward, that getting into due diligence and stuff that I didn't have any skeletons that I was afraid that the deal would
Sure.
fall through. But as long as the bank would approve everything and whatnot, I was very confident, you know, from that point, you know, going forward. So, and likewise, my brokers were also, you know, confident that, you know, they didn't know, you know, what we were going to run into in the due diligence, you know, period, but I was pretty confident.
Micah, your broker, and Matthew, I think you'll appreciate this because it sounds like you do quite a few, or you are in the lower middle market transactions. I hear the EBITDA, I hear putting forth the LOI, I hear all the trigger words because it's a different process than buying
Yeah.
the small business.
Sure,
But it seems
sure.
like you took that approach to a smaller size company, which is fine. But it all started with the price. So we go and we try to sell the business on our own, and I'm in an industry and I read online, well, a company in my industry just sold for 12 times, a 12 multiple, 12 times EBITDA. Well, mine must be worth that too. Well, yeah, okay, but that was they were doing $500 million in sales, or, $50 million in sales, or whatever it was. And they had EBITDA of, double digits. So they were worth that. So size does matter when it comes to the multiple or the price of a business. But what happens all too often, Micah, is business brokers, if they're not trained formally and they don't really understand the process, or they're just desperate for listings, they'll just flat out ask the seller how much you want to sell your business for. Great, let's go to market. And when they run into a buyer like Matthew, and Matthew says, "Well, how did you price this business?" And most of the times he's asking that to be kind because he knows there was no rhyme nor reason that went into it, because someone just plucked a number out of thin air, because there's no way this business may even cash flow if it were to go to a bank. So the most important thing was, in first time selling your business, you may have ideas from what people have told you businesses are worth or what they transact from, but to actually have a professional who's in the marketplace every day to come in and help you price that business. And then when someone like Matthew looks at it and says, all right, I don't think it was priced overly high. It certainly wasn't priced low. It was priced right in the range of where it would be. It helps really make the process move along, because Matthew, if this would have been listed at twice the price, or a number that you would have deemed to be unreasonable, do you even make the phone call?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. So first, I'll say your comments before. It's almost as if you were listening in on a phone call I had with another broker last week. But no, I think even if the price listing was not right, I would probably still make the phone call and I've done this a bunch with brokers. Have a very frank discussion about, listen, this is what we see in this piece of the market and in these types of deals, and here's why, and here's kind of what we would be willing to pay. Very specifically, and Micah and I have had this discussion. For his business, if it were priced, substantially higher than it was, let's call it, 15% more than it was, or more than that, that would have put it right at the cusp of, I probably would have just built out this service line on our own, right? We have the existing customer base, and it's not a hugely capital intensive business. So, if it were priced dramatically higher, or a fair bit higher, we would have probably just pursued building this on our own as a piece of the puzzle rather than buying it. And yeah, that's kind of how we looked at this one. And I'm not going to share any specific numbers. I'll let Micah decide to share whatever he feels like.
That's the value of the professional that you brought to the table, Micah. He made it possible that it was attractive enough in the marketplace that someone like Matthew would say, okay, let's have the discussion. So now you're under an LOI, Micah, and you're still running a business. You can't let that business run into the ground, because the buyers during due diligence are, let me see updated financials. They want to make sure up to the day of closing that everything is still running smoothly. So this is really where the role or the importance of an intermediary or a broker or an advisor, if they're doing their job right, really comes into play, because they allow you to do your job, run your business, but then quarterback the process. So why don't you talk to us about, it's the first time you've sold a business and now you're going through it. You're under an LOI, you're going through due diligence. Talk to us about the broker's role with you in that process, whether it made it easy or harder, how it went for you.
Do you mind if I jump back to the pricing
No.
talk there? So Real quick too, like part of going back to when I was talking to brokers and like I have no idea what I'd never done this before. And, I do a lot of Google and YouTube and can try to figure out what's my business worth, but I really didn't know. And so I do think that that's where I did lean on my broker a little bit. It's like, hey, listen, like I don't want to leave tons of money on the table. I built this business, like out of my garage. Like I have put a lot of work into it. There's a point where if it's worth X amount, it's not worth selling, if it's, but at the same time, I know it's not worth, millions and millions of dollars. Like what is, so I did lean a lot on the brokers and right back to the introductory calls I had with other, with other brokers. Once I chose the broker and they really dug into what the value was. I think they did that before technically I signed with them. They did an evaluation and whatnot. And my particular broker talked with some banks and whatnot and had them, give him some opinions and stuff. And so like he was very confident that, he kind of gave me a range of, hey, this is what we think your business is worth. And this is the max, X amount is the max amount that we think banks would approve. And so, that's kind of where where we started. And, once they evaluated it, I did ask like, let's ask a little bit more, and nothing crazy, but, I think that was really, really important. Like I never could have done that without a broker because again, I would have literally just thrown a number out there. And if you asked me, hey, where'd you come up with that number? I don't know. I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I think it's also worth noting that sort of
Right.
unlike, right, this isn't an industry like home services where there's a ton of transactions and you hear about it all the time and it's much easier to nail down, right? It's number one, it's kind of right, it's automotive industry, but then it's an even smaller niche into that. So it's hard
It
to
was
figure
hard.
out.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't envy the broker and having to decide on the right price for it because it's not like there's a ton of representative. You can go point and say, oh, well, here's six more businesses that are just
Yeah.
like yours, and here's what they sold for.
Yeah. There's not very many mobile, fleet servicing
Right.
businesses that do any sort of size. There's a ton of little ones,
Yeah.
one or two people. And then there's a few large national ones like a Firestone Direct or a Spiffy or somebody like that, is a very large business, but that's not even like their main business,
Right.
but yeah, I agree. I think the brokers, I think they did a good job valuing it. And, at least we know that the banks approved it. So,
That's the key point. They leaned on their resources that they have that you don't have. They reach out to the banker and say, "Hey, let me talk to you about a company, and these are the sales, this is the revenue, this is the adjusted net income. Based on this, we're looking at going to market or value it at this price. Well, does that fit into the bank's parameters of what we could get a loan? And if the answer is no, well, that's a good indication that you're probably overpriced. So, broker, great job. Got the price, got it done for you, Micah. And now what?
one quick thing, I would say from a seller standpoint, if I was telling my friend who's selling a business, like, don't be overly stubborn on like thinking your business is worth way more than it is. Like, take some advice from different brokers, get different perspectives. I told my broker like I don't want to be in the process like crazy, like wait on this forever. Like, let's
Mhm.
put a good price on it, but not, overly high. Let's not ask, 2x what it's worth because I don't want to see my listing on there with all these other biz buy sell listings that are on there for 12 months and never sell. And so I think it's definitely like a fine line. You definitely, as an owner, you want to get as much as you can, but let's be and, and speak with brokers and they'll give you their opinions on it and stuff. So I don't know. That's my thoughts.
You had a viable business. It wasn't a fire sale, and we were able to price it. They were able to price it in the marketplace that got the attention of Matthew. And now you got to go through something that Matthew's been through before, but you've never been through before, and that's a due diligence and the list of things they want to see, and when should I give it to them, and what order should it be done. So, Michael, why don't you talk to us about that process, the value or that the broker brought to the table during the due diligence process?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question. I mean, I think they kept us on track and and I was as patient as I could be, but I know Matthew had a lot going on working another transaction, and my brokers, we wanted to get this deal done, and everything takes longer than you want it to sometimes. From our first buyer seller meeting, and then and then conversations after that point, like I understood the importance to keep things running and smooth and growing. And my goal was to continue the growth through that time period, which I think ended up being, I don't know, 6 months or 5 or 6 months, something like that. And we had some record months after that point, and had good numbers all the way through. But having the broker handle the side that I don't really know about, and the process, where I was able just to go to work and keep the business going well, and get new customers and everything, I think was, that was very nice. And anyway,
Matthew, dealing with a broker or an intermediary once it's under LOI and you've put forth your due diligence request list, talk about the process in dealing with a broker. Sometimes, again, dealing with the wrong broker, it's like pulling teeth. You can't get the information you need, or you feel restricted that there are times you want to be able to communicate with the buyer, but you can't. But in this situation, talk to us about, in dealing with a broker, how the process went during due diligence.
Yeah, sure. And I just have to say one thing, because I went to go look at the calendar, because you had me worried there, Micah. So we were 3.5 months from LOI to close.
Really?
I'm sure it felt like
Felt
6 months.
Felt like forever. Yeah. No.
Once you said that, and I had to look, I was like, "There's no way it was 6 months. There's no way it took
Was it
that
three
long.
and a half months? That's it.
It was 3.5 months."
Okay. Yeah. 3 months, 8 months, same thing.
Um, so yeah, for us, because like I said, we've done this a few times, and this is also this was a small enough transaction from our end that we didn't do a full quality of earnings. I didn't have sort of our accountants go super deep into things, because number one, it was of a size where I could do most of that myself, and sort of number two, it was readily apparent from the first set of information we got over from Micah that basically that he had a very cleanly run business. So, full credit to Micah and to his accountant, who, for the past 4 years, like, you had zero personal expenses running through running through the books, and you had a very clean view of the P&L, and the balance sheet wasn't crazy and was very easy to understand. So it made our job on our end extraordinarily easy. And the way I sort of started out is, I sent to Micah via the brokers kind of the full list of, in an ideal world, here's all the stuff we'd get. And if there's certain things that can't be provided, totally cool. We can sit down and have a discussion about them. If there's certain things on this list that just don't make sense, also totally cool. We can have a discussion about it, and prioritize this stuff first, because this is the stuff where if we see any issues, we're gonna call it off and tell you why. And then let's sort of progressively go deeper. And I try to be clear with the brokers that kind of our way of doing things, so to speak, that makes it sound like it's much more rigorous and formal than it is, we want to get through these couple of things before I go and get, say, my attorney engaged, and before I start paying legal fees. And, we sort of stair-stepped it through, which I think at times maybe clashed a little bit with the broker's expectation of what the process would look like. And that's fine. I totally get that. But yeah, from our end, it was, here's all the things we'd need in the order we'd prefer it in. And again, sort of full credit to Micah and his accountant in particular. Everything we needed was there, was extraordinarily clean and very well organized, was turned over really quick. I'm used to, sort of in my history of kind of real estate deals and other things, kind of I never want to be the one that somebody's waiting on, right? I never want the bank to be waiting on information. I never want the counterparty. I want to be the one on top of things. And this was one of the first times I found myself where we were a little bit behind because of how quickly Micah and his team were able to respond, which was great.
Yep, you got to make stuff happen. Yep.
And a lot of times, what happens in dealing with business brokers, again, if they're let's shamelessly plug the IBBA, they're a CBI or a master CBI, and they're at the top of their craft. And a lot of times they do what we call pre-diligence. They know the things that the buyers are going to ask for. Right. So they have them ready ahead of time. This way they can get them over, because time kills deals, and we never want to be the one that's killing the deal. This question is for both of you, and you can go back and forth if you want. And you might have the one transaction where this didn't happen, but 3.5 months that it took to get this thing, although it felt like 8 months over there to Micah, but 3.5 months, was there ever a time there where things got a little contentious or things got a little rocky or somewhere where maybe the broker had to step in and he was able to maybe take something that could have escalated but kept it to a point where we were able to get through it, or was it just smooth sailing all the way through?
Yeah, I feel like it was pretty smooth. I mean, the
Agreed.
only, not contentious, but the only, discussion or negotiation was, I think, on the LOI, the structure of the deal.
Yeah.
But I just put basically what my, opinions on part of the deal was. It was some owner financing portion of the deal that I wasn't interested in, said why, and told my brokers, hey, send it back. This is, my opinions on it. And I feel like it did have to, I guess a little bit talk my brokers into, hey, just send back what I'm telling you. Worst case scenario, the buyer says, no, not interested in that. They're not going to just run away because of, I'm not interested in like a seller financing option. And, Matthew was gracious enough to, I guess, look at that and say, okay, he's made some good points and, yeah, still interested in the deal. So, but I would say as far as the due diligence goes, there was no, like, yeah, everything honestly, like, very, very smooth. I tried to give him everything that my brokers did in the very beginning ask for me to send over a bunch of what I thought were tax returns and financials and different things that buyers would want to see anyway. And so I think Matthew got some of that, but he had a good list of other items that he wanted to see during due diligence and made it really easy. The brokers had a cool portal. I'm sure this is super common, but a really good shared portal that was easy to upload things into and take things out of, and that definitely made organization. I'm big on trying to be organized with things, and that made it really easy to know has the buyer received, what has what have I sent. My accountant was able to use that same portal, and it was really easy to share documents and different things, which made it nice. But as far as any sort of issues or contention going back and forth in due diligence, I think it was pretty smooth on my side.
Yeah, and I'd agree. Yeah, I mean, during the LOI, right, it was, and just we're clear for the audience, right? This was a back and forth over about 10% of the purchase price sitting in a seller note.
Yeah.
And it was one of those, that's sort of a default ask from us. Micah had his reasons for not being interested. Mike and I have talked about this since, and I think if we would have pushed hard on needing that, he probably would have relented. End of the day, I had a level of comfort that we were fine without it, given the size of the transaction and some other pieces. So that was easy enough to sort through. Beyond that, yeah, nothing. I'm trying to think here. Nothing. Yeah, nothing crazy popped up. Nothing unexpected popped up. As I said, kind of testament to you and your accountants that, right, the financials were really clean. Like it was a well run, well operated business. So it made kind of our life extraordinarily easy.
And from a broker's point of view, it makes our life easier. We wish all of our clients had clean books and records and we didn't have to account for all the different ad backs and the things that went on. But it also sounds like, Micah, that the process went smooth. It seems like your broker may have had discussions with you, but you seemed like it was well prepared. First time you ever been through the process, but did your broker do a good job of at least attempting to set the expectations of the things that were going to happen during the
Yeah.
process?
Yeah. Great job. Yeah. Yeah. He took me from having zero experience, you know, knowing how things were going to work. And yeah, he set a good, path forward and plan going forward. And I felt like we stayed on track very well. Um, and yeah, learned a lot during the process. So I think they did a great job.
Think about it. You're going up against this guy over here, Matthew, who, buys businesses and has a great background. And now you're have a business that you started, that you built, but never been through the process. To have someone like your broker on your side, you feel like, you're in a fair fight, right? It's not, that I hate to use the word fight, but it's a fair battle. You're going to go in and negotiate with someone and you feel like on your side that you're well equipped to be able to, and not just stand up to Matthew, but when something's asked for, be able to negotiate on your behalf and talk it
Right.
through and explain why. So again, I think it brings you know, the level of fairness to the seller equal to hopefully that of the buyer.
I agree with
And
that. Yeah. Yeah,
and I
definitely
mean, and
levels the playing field a little bit. Having a broker levels the playing field a little bit from somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience. If I sold, 4, 5, 6 businesses and I wasn't daily operating a specific business, it might make sense to try to sell it on your own. I don't know. But I would say definitely, I would use a broker again if I had another business just because it was smooth. And yeah.
I mean, I'll say if I were to sell my business tomorrow, I'd have an intermediary involved. There's not a chance I would try and do it myself. I mean, just the between sort of the aforementioned right assistance with valuation, the ability to help with marketing rather than just blindly throwing something up on Biz Buy Sell. Like I know the broker that you use, Micah. Like I was talking to him a little while ago. He's his list of prospective buyers is kind of several thousand deep. Um, and tailored by sort of industry and size and a couple of other bits and pieces. So, I as a potential seller in the future, I'd stand sort of no hope of replicating that reach and structure on on my own, right? And I mean, I've seen cases where, people who have sold businesses on their own have not made the amount of money that they could have or should have.
Yeah. I think it would be easier to sell a house on your own than a business on your own.
Agreed. Yeah,
Like,
yeah, agreed.
you don't, realtors are very helpful, but a lot of times, especially if you're knowledgeable about real estate, like you don't have to have a realtor other than it being the norm. Um, I think the norm in, selling a business, definitely the business broker does a lot more than, a lot more interactions, a lot more involved, than like a realtor, I would say. But it'd be easier to
I
sell a
agree.
house on your own than it is to sell a business on your own.
Yeah.
My sister, who is a business attorney and also a real estate attorney, when her and her husband were buying a business, they hired an attorney to do the closing. You'd say, why would she do that? She does that for a living. What would they say about an attorney who represents themselves? They have a fool for a client, right?
Right,
She
right,
she realized it was too close to the situation, hard to make clear decisions
right.
when emotions could get involved. The same thing with selling a business. You bought, it's your baby. You built it up. You're ready to sell it. Someone says something that you might feel that isn't put your business in the greatest light, or how this or how that. And the broker, he could mediate that and have conversation where the seller may get offended and be like, well, how dare you? That was pretty insulting. But in this case, I think the testament of the whole and the moral of the whole story was, Micah, you used a broker and you had a great process, and he was able to set your expectations from the beginning, from pricing to the LOI to getting through that, and you went to a closing. And here today, you both are on this podcast, sharing your story with others. So I'm going to start with Matthew, and then I want to hear from you, Micah. Matthew, you started on this, and this will be the last question I ask of you both. You said if you had a business to sell, you would hire a broker. So talk to the person that's out there today that's thinking about selling their business, and the importance and why you feel it might be to their benefit to hire, let's call it a really good broker, not just a
Yeah.
broker.
Yeah. I mean, the what goes through my head is this is something that is like the sale of a business that I would potentially only do a couple of times, if more than once ever in a career or in a lifetime. And you're talking with a business broker or other intermediary who might have done this 50, 100, 200, 300 plus times, or he does this couple dozen times a year. There's an invaluable level of expertise that comes in as a result of doing this over and over and over again and seeing all the things that can go well and also all the things that can go not so well. Additionally, as I said, right, I I think I've got a reasonable handle on, say, what our business today is worth. But in my industry, like there's a couple of sell side brokers who only work in our industry. And I know no matter what, they're going to have better access to information and a better sense of kind of what value the business has. Additionally, as I said, right, any broker, especially if they happen to fit within a particular industry, if such a thing exists for a seller's industry, is is going to have a much greater kind of marketing reach than I do, right? If I were doing this on my own, trying to sell, I would put it up on Biz Buy Sell and hope for the best, I suppose. Right. I would have an expectation any broker I'd talk to is going to, right, is going to have a pool of potential buyers. And presumably those are going to be buyers who are actually interested in my industry and interested and capable of a business the size of mine and all those sorts of things. And like while paying a broker costs a lot, and I can see having not been in that position, but I can commiserate with Micah having to write that check. I would like to think that, especially as the business gets bigger, that sort of the upside opportunity from having it kind of fully marketed, priced well, hitting all the potential buyers would more than outweigh that incremental cost. And I'd agree with Michael. Like I would sooner. I've never done a real estate transaction without sell side representation, but I would sooner sell a house or do a real estate transaction unrepped than I would attempt to sell a business unrepped.
Mike, and now I'll ask you, you've been through the process. You're sitting here with Matthew, who bought your business. But if you had to rewind and go back to the beginning again, would you go through the process of hiring a broker, or would you do it on your own?
Yeah, I would definitely go through the process and hire a broker again. Yeah, for sure. Matthew listed most all the reasons, but like I said, especially if I was running my business daily, I would definitely, yeah, hire a broker. I think, yeah, they bring a bunch of experience, time saving, value in helping price the business accurately. Like, I think it was worth it, and it does suck to write a big check, but I may not have written a check to a broker or ever received a check from Matthew if I didn't have a broker. So yeah, I would do it again. Yeah.
And it's possible that you could have sold it on your own, but maybe you don't get as much money as you got. And so maybe the value was there, or maybe you priced it in a price point that you weren't sure of, and it was exceeded the market, and it took you, twice as long to go through it. And then even when you get it under contract, going through that whole due diligence process and putting things together and giving away information too soon that may be proprietary to your company, or they could just give away. Because Matthew said, if it reached a certain price point, that it might have been where, hey, we're just going to do this on our own, and instead of having to buy it. So again, there's a lot of benefits out there, and Micah and Matthew, I appreciate both of your time today. You know how I know this was a good transaction? One, you're both on the podcast with me today. So, Matthew's not here complaining that he paid too much, and Mike is not saying he didn't get enough. Matthew might think, man, I paid a little much, and Micah might think, yeah, I could have probably gotten a little more. But at the end of the day, you're both smiling, which means you're both happy with the transaction, both happy with the process, both happy with each other. And that being said, it's a testament to both of you. And I thank you both for coming on the show today and sharing your experience with other people that are going to be in your shoes or might be in your shoes right now. So thank you both very much.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day.
Have a great day.
Bye, guys. Well, everyone, want to thank you so much for watching and listening to today's episode, especially if you're thinking about selling your business. You think and you say, it's a lot of money to pay a broker, but maybe it's not. Maybe if you find the right broker that has the right credentials, that is looking out for your best interest, that they're going to bring way more value to the table than that check that you write. So like Micah did, interview several brokers and make the decision based on the one that you feel is going to represent you the best. And like Matthew said, he's a buyer, but he said, if I sold a business, I would use a broker or an intermediary. There is a lot of value to that. So I encourage you can go to ibba.org and you can see a list of CBIs in your area. But if you're looking at selling your business now or in the future, I'm sure today's show was invaluable to you. You got to hear from both the buyer and the seller why, with working with the broker, it made the transaction flow a whole lot better, and it got them to the closing table. So I invite you at this time to go to ibba.org/insights, where you could subscribe to the show. You don't have to miss any more episodes of the podcast, and you can go back and listen to some great episodes that are archived. So please follow the show, listen to the show. We thank you for being supporters of the show. So I want to take the time right now to thank you for listening today. I look forward to bringing you more great topics and guests on IBBA Insights.